Okay, so here's the thing nobody tells you. You can eat the exact same way you ate at 35. You can work out the exact same amount. Nothing about your routine has changed. And yet somehow you've gained 10, 15, 20 pounds. And it all seems to have landed in one spot, right around your middle, like it teleported there overnight. If that's you, I need you to hear this right now. It is not because you suddenly lost willpower. It is not because you stopped trying. There is an actual physiological reason this is happening. And once you understand it, this whole confusing chapter starts to make a lot more sense. I want to walk you through what I call the levels of weight gain in menopause, because it's not one single thing. It's not just hormones, full stop, end of explanation, like you'll hear from some doctor who's rushing you out the door in your 12-minute appointment. It's actually a layered process. There are different stages, different mechanisms, and different reasons your body starts holding on to weight differently than it used to. And once you see the whole picture, every level, you stop blaming yourself and you start working with your body instead of fighting it. So let's start at the beginning, because honestly, the confusion usually starts way before anyone even says the word menopause. Level 1 is the quiet stage. This is early perimenopause, and for a lot of women, it sneaks in during their late 30s or early 40s, long before periods get irregular, long before hot flashes show up, long before anyone would think to connect the dots. At this stage, your estrogen and progesterone are still being produced, but they've stopped being predictable. Some months, your estrogen might surge higher than it ever did in your 20s. Other months, it dips. It's not a steady decline, it's more like a roller coaster that's losing its rhythm, and your body notices that instability even if your mind doesn't have a name for it yet. This is the stage where a lot of women tell me, I just feel puffier. Not fatter exactly, puffier. Water retention becomes more common because progesterone, which normally has a mild diuretic effect, starts fluctuating, and when it dips, you can hold on to more fluid. Clothes fit a little differently. Rings feel snugger some days. You might step on the scale and see a number that's up 2 or 3 pounds from a week ago with zero explanation, and then it comes back down, and you think you're losing your mind. You're not. This is level 1, and it's honestly the level that gets the least attention because it's subtle. It's not dramatic enough for anyone to take seriously yet, but it's often the very first signal that things are shifting. I remember a friend of mine, she was 41, telling me she'd started buying looser jeans and just assumed it was stress eating during a rough year at work. Nothing about her habits had changed. Her doctor told her she was fine, blood work was normal, and sent her on her way. It wasn't until almost 2 years later, when her periods started getting irregular, that anyone connected it back to hormones. That gap, where your body is already changing but nobody validates it, that's incredibly common. And if you're in it right now, I want you to know you're not imagining things. Level 2 is where things start getting more noticeable, and this is usually mid to late perimenopause. This is when estrogen starts its more consistent decline, not just fluctuating, but actually trending downward overall. And here's the part that surprises people. Estrogen isn't just a reproductive hormone. It plays a role in how your body decides where to store fat. For most of your reproductive years, estrogen tends to favor storing fat in the hips, thighs, and butt, what people sometimes call a pear shape. It's actually thought to be somewhat protective, metabolically speaking, but as estrogen drops, that storage pattern shifts. Fat starts moving toward the abdomen instead. This is the stage where women start saying, I have never had a belly in my life, and now I have one, and I don't understand what's happening. This is what people often call the meno belly. And I want to be really clear about something. This isn't just cosmetic, and it's not just about how your genes fit. Visceral fat, which is the fat that accumulates around your organs rather than just under the skin, tends to increase during this transition. And that matters because visceral fat behaves differently than the fat you might have had on your hips in your 20s. It's more metabolically active, and research suggests it's associated with a higher risk of things like insulin resistance and cardiovascular strain. So when your body starts redistributing fat to your midsection during this stage, it's not vanity. It's a genuine shift in how your body is functioning, and it deserves to be treated that way instead of dismissed as just getting older. So many of you have messaged me some version of the same thing. I've done nothing different and my whole shape has changed. And level 2 is usually the explanation. Your body isn't betraying you. It's responding to a completely different hormonal environment than the one it was operating in before, and it's making storage decisions based on that new environment. Level 3 is where your metabolism itself starts to shift, and this is the piece that I think gets the least airtime, even though it might be the most important one to understand. As estrogen declines, many women experience changes in insulin sensitivity. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I want to explain this in plain language rather than clinical language. Insulin is the hormone that helps move sugar from your bloodstream into your cells to be used for energy. When your cells respond well to insulin, this process is efficient. When they respond less well, which is what's meant by insulin resistance, your body has to produce more insulin to do the same job. And elevated insulin levels are associated with increased fat storage, particularly around the abdomen. Research suggests that the drop in estrogen during perimenopause and menopause can make cells somewhat less responsive to insulin than they were before. This doesn't mean every woman develops diabetes or prediabetes. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it does mean that for a lot of women, the same amount of carbohydrates that used to be processed easily now get stored more readily as fat, especially visceral fat. This is often why women in this stage notice that sugar and refined carbs seem to hit different than they used to. A plate of pasta that never used to affect you might now leave you feeling sluggish, bloated, and somehow hungrier an hour later. That's not you being dramatic. That's a real shift in how your body is processing that food. This is also, by the way, part of why so many women in this stage start noticing more cravings, particularly for sugar and refined carbs, especially in the afternoon or evening. When your cells aren't taking up glucose as efficiently, your body can send stronger hunger signals even after you've eaten, because at a cellular level, it's not getting the fuel it thinks it needs. It's not a lack of discipline, it's your internal chemistry asking for something it's not getting efficiently anymore. Level 4 is about muscle, and I think this might be the single most under-discussed piece of this entire conversation. Starting sometime in your 30s and accelerating through perimenopause and into menopause, most people begin to lose muscle mass through a process called sarcopenia. It happens to men too, but the hormonal shifts of menopause seem to speed it up for women specifically. And here's why this matters so much for weight. Muscle is metabolically expensive to maintain, meaning it burns more calories at rest than fat tissue does. So as you lose muscle, your resting metabolic rate, the number of calories your body burns just existing before you've done a single workout, naturally goes down. This is the level that explains why so many women say, I'm eating the same, moving the same, and still gaining. Because you might genuinely not be doing anything differently, but your body composition has quietly shifted underneath you. Less muscle means fewer calories burned at rest, which means the same intake that used to maintain your weight now creates a slow, steady surplus. It's not sudden, it's not dramatic, it's just this gradual erosion that adds up over years. And most women don't even realize it's happening because nobody's showing them what's going on beneath the surface. I want to pause here because I know this can feel discouraging, and I don't want to leave you there. This is actually one of the most hopeful parts of the whole conversation because muscle mass is one of the few pieces of this puzzle you have real, direct influence over. Unlike hormone levels, which you can't just decide to change, resistance training has been shown in research to help preserve and even rebuild muscle mass at almost any age, including well into your 50s, 60s, and beyond. This is why you'll hear me, and honestly, every woman who's done real research on this topic talking about strength training constantly. It's not about aesthetics. It's about protecting your metabolic engine during a stage of life when your hormones are actively working to shrink it. Level 5 is the stage that I think causes the most emotional damage, honestly, more than any of the physical stuff, and that's the plateau. This is where women describe doing everything right. Eating well, exercising, cutting back, tracking, trying, and the scale just doesn't move. Or worse, it creeps up anyway. This is the stage where so many women start to feel like something is fundamentally broken in them, like their body has simply stopped responding to effort altogether. Here's what's actually happening, as best as current research can explain it. By this point, you often have multiple factors compounding at once. Lower estrogen affecting fat distribution and insulin sensitivity, reduced muscle mass lowering your baseline calorie burn, and very commonly, disrupted sleep, which throws another wrench into things. Poor sleep affects two key hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin tells your brain you're hungry, leptin tells your brain you're full, and when sleep is fragmented, which is extremely common during this transition due to night sweats, anxiety, or just hormonal shifts affecting sleep architecture, ghrelin tends to rise and leptin tends to drop. So you're hungrier and less satisfied by the same amount of food on top of everything else already happening metabolically. And then there's stress, which I think doesn't get taken seriously enough in this conversation. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, tends to interact with fat storage in ways that seem to particularly favor the abdominal area, especially when it's chronically elevated rather than just a short-term spike. And let's be honest, midlife tends to come with a lot of chronic stress. Aging parents, teenagers, career pressure, marriages going through their own transitions on top of a body that's changing in ways you didn't sign up for. All of that stress isn't just emotionally taxing, it may genuinely be contributing to the physical picture too. So when you put level 5 together, hormonal shifts, muscle loss, sleep disruption, and elevated stress, all happening at the same time, you get a body that seems resistant to the same strategies that used to work reliably. This is not a personal failure. This is multiple systems all under pressure simultaneously, and honestly, I think if more women understood this, there would be so much less shame attached to this stage of life. Level 6, and this is really more of a landing point than a level, is what tends to happen once you're firmly into postmenopause, meaning it's been a year or more since your last period. At this stage, hormone levels have generally stabilized at their new lower baseline. They're not fluctuating wildly like they were in perimenopause. And what a lot of women report, once they get through the roughest stretch of transition, is that things do stabilize, even if they've stabilized at a different set point than before. The roller coaster smooths out. That doesn't mean weight automatically comes off. The changes in body composition and metabolism from the earlier levels don't just reverse themselves, but a lot of women say the sense of chaos, the unpredictability, does ease up. You're no longer fighting a moving target quite the same way. Now, I want to talk about what actually seems to help, because I don't want this to be one of those videos that just lays out a problem and leaves you there feeling defeated. Understanding the levels is step 1, but you deserve to know what to actually do with this information. The first thing, and I cannot say this strongly enough, is strength training. Not cardio as your primary strategy, strength training. If muscle loss is accelerating during this stage, and muscle is what keeps your metabolism running efficiently, then building and preserving muscle becomes one of the most powerful tools available to you. This doesn't mean you need to become a bodybuilder or spend 2 hours a day in a gym. Research suggests that even 2 to 3 sessions a week of resistance training using weights or resistance bands or your own body weight can make a meaningful difference in preserving muscle mass and supporting metabolic health during this transition. The second thing is protein. And this one surprises people because so many of us grew up in a diet culture that treated protein as this optional extra rather than a priority. But your protein needs actually seem to increase during this stage of life, partly because of that muscle loss we talked about. Your body needs more raw material to maintain and build muscle, and it also seems to become somewhat less efficient at using the protein you do eat as you age, a phenomenon sometimes called anabolic resistance. So the amount that used to be enough at 30 may genuinely not be enough at 45 or 50. Prioritizing protein at each meal rather than treating it as an afterthought is something a lot of women find genuinely changes how they feel, not just how they look. The third thing is sleep. And I know that sounds almost too simple to matter, but given what we talked about with ghrelin and leptin, sleep isn't a luxury item in this conversation. It's foundational. If your sleep is being disrupted by night sweats or anxiety or racing thoughts at 3 a.m., addressing that isn't separate from your weight goals, it's actually central to them. That might mean talking to a doctor about your options. It might mean adjusting your evening routine. It might mean a dozen different things depending on your situation, but it's worth taking seriously rather than just pushing through exhausted, which so many of us have been trained to do. The fourth thing is being honest about carbohydrates, not eliminating them, not fearing them, just being a little more thoughtful. Given what's happening with insulin sensitivity during this stage, pairing carbs with protein and fiber, and maybe being a bit more mindful of portion and timing seems to help a lot of women feel more stable throughout the day, both in terms of energy and cravings. This isn't about restriction. It's about working with a body that's processing things a little differently than it used to. And the fifth thing, which I saved for last because I think it's the most overlooked, is addressing stress not as an afterthought, but as an actual piece of the puzzle. That might mean therapy. It might mean boundaries around your time. It might mean something as simple as a walk outside without your phone. I know manage your stress can sound like empty advice you've heard 1,000 times, but in the context of everything we just talked about, cortisol's relationship with abdominal fat storage, it's not fluff. It's physiologically relevant. I want to say something else before we wrap up, because I think it matters more than any of the individual tips I just gave you. The way our culture talks about weight gain in menopause is almost entirely centered on blame. It's framed as something that happens because women let themselves go or stop trying. And I hope that after walking through these 6 levels with me, you can see how absurd that framing really is. This is a complex, layered, hormonally driven process involving your fat distribution, your insulin sensitivity, your muscle mass, your sleep architecture, and your stress hormones, all shifting at the same time, often without a single doctor sitting you down to explain any of it. You were never given the full picture. Most women aren't. And I think that gap in understanding is where so much unnecessary shame gets to move in and set up camp. So if you take one thing from this video, I want it to be this. What's happening to your body right now has a name, it has an explanation, and it has real research-backed things you can do to work with it. It is not a mystery, and it is definitely not a personal failing. You are not broken. You are going through one of the most significant hormonal transitions of your entire life, and your body is doing exactly what bodies do when the chemical environment they've operated in for decades suddenly starts to change. If this made things click for you even a little bit, I would really love it if you hit subscribe, because this channel is basically me working through everything I wish someone had explained to me clearly, without the shame and without the 12-minute doctor's appointment rush. I've got a video coming up that goes deep into the sleep piece specifically, because I think that one deserves its own full conversation rather than the few minutes I gave it today. And after that, I want to talk through strength training for women who've genuinely never lifted a weight in their life, because I know that just start strength training can feel completely overwhelming if you don't know where to begin. So if any of that sounds useful to you, stick around because we're just getting started and there's a lot more I want to walk through with you.